The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across Charlotte Mercer's pristine white Armani suit as she raised her champagne glass, unaware that in precisely 7 seconds, her world would collide with that of a desperate father whose trembling hands were about to spill more than just wine. The vintage Chateau Margaux 1947 worth $30,000 crashed across her chest like blood on snow. But it wasn't the ruined suit or the gasps of horror from Wall Street's elite that stopped her cold. It was the whispered medical code from the waiter's lips that only 12 people in the world would recognize. Your daughter's cyanosis pattern. She has less than 6 months unless someone attempts the Yamamoto cross procedure. The billionaire CEO's hand froze midair, her security team inches from tackling the man, as every board member at the Galaxy Corporation Gala held their breath. This is their story, a story of redemption, impossible choices, and the moment when pride collides with a parent's desperation. Stay with me until the end, and don't forget to comment your city below so I can see how far this story has traveled. The Galaxy Corporation's annual charity gala occupied the entire 57th floor of the Meridian Tower, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of Manhattan's glittering skyline. The November air outside was crisp and unforgiving, but inside, warmth radiated from both the elaborate heating system and the collective wealth of the 400 guests whose combined net worth exceeded the GDP of several small nations. Daniel Cross adjusted his borrowed bow tie for the 100th time, the fabric rough against his calloused fingers. His hands, once steady enough to suture infant heart valves under 30 times magnification, now shook with the simple effort of balancing a silver tray laden with champagne flutes. The irony wasn't lost on him. Hands that had once saved lives now served drinks to people who wouldn't remember his face 5 seconds after he walked away. Table 7 needs the Chateau Margaux, Marcus, the head waiter, hissed in his ear. And for God's sake, Daniel, don't screw this up. That's Charlotte Mercer's table. One complaint from her and we're all looking for new jobs. Daniel nodded, his throat tight. He needed this job, needed it more than Marcus could possibly understand. The $600 he'd earned tonight would cover exactly half of Lila's next cardiology appointment. Dr. Brennan had been patient, accepting partial payments for the past 3 months, but patience had limits, and Daniel was running out of time. He retrieved the wine from the service station, the bottle heavier than it should have been, as if it contained the weight of his fears rather than fermented grapes. $30,000 for a single bottle, enough to cover Lila's medical expenses for the next year. The absurdity of it made his jaw clench. The path to table 7 wound through a maze of designer gowns and custom tuxedos. Daniel kept his eyes down, professional invisibility being the first rule of high-end catering. He'd learned to become a ghost, present but unseen, efficient but unmemorable. It was a far cry from his days at Johns Hopkins, where his name had once been spoken with reverence in cardiac surgery departments across the country. "Watch where you're going, idiot." The voice belonged to Preston Vale, a board member whose reputation for cruelty was matched only by his influence in the pharmaceutical industry. Daniel had served him twice already tonight, each interaction punctuated by deliberately placed obstacles, a briefcase in the path, an elbow extended at the wrong moment. Preston seemed to take perverse pleasure in making the waitstaff stumble. Daniel sidestepped carefully, but Preston's foot shot out at the last second, catching him mid-stride. Time slowed. The bottle flew from Daniel's hands in a perfect arc, its trajectory as predetermined as fate itself. The cork, loosened by the movement, popped free with an almost musical note. $30,000 of vintage wine erupted in a crimson cascade, and every drop of it found its target on Charlotte Mercer's pristine white suit. The room fell silent, not gradually, but instantly, as if someone had pressed a mute button on 400 conversations. Every head turned toward table 7, where Charlotte Mercer sat frozen, her suit transformed into a Jackson Pollock painting of privilege destroyed. Daniel's mind cataloged the disaster in medical terms, a habit he couldn't break even after 3 years away from the operating room. The wine spread across the fabric like contrast dye in an angiogram, mapping the topography of catastrophe across her chest and lap. His career as a waiter, his only source of income, his only hope of keeping Lila stable, was over. "I'm so sorry," he began, dropping to his knees to retrieve the empty bottle, his hands fumbling with napkins that were pathetically inadequate for the magnitude of the spill. "Please, Ms. Mercer, it was an accident. An accident?" Charlotte's voice cut through the air like a scalpel. She stood slowly, wine dripping from her jacket onto the marble floor in a steady rhythm that sounded like a countdown to his termination. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Daniel looked up, ready to plead, ready to beg if necessary. Lila's face flashed in his mind. Her smile, despite the oxygen tubes. Her laugh, despite the fatigue that painted shadows under her 8-year-old eyes. But as he raised his gaze to Charlotte Mercer's face, his words died in his throat. It wasn't her anger that stopped him, though her eyes blazed with fury. It wasn't the security guards already moving toward him, their hands reaching for his arms. It was the slight blue tinge around her lips, barely visible under her perfect makeup. It was the way she held her shoulders, not with the confidence of a CEO, but with the careful posture of someone conserving energy. It was the medical alert bracelet on her wrist, designer disguised but unmistakable to someone who'd spent 15 years in pediatric cardiac units. But most of all, it was her nails. The subtle cyanosis was there, that distinctive blue-purple hue that spoke of chronic oxygen deprivation. He'd seen it 1,000 times in his career, but only in one specific context: children with complex congenital heart defects. "Ma'am," Preston Vale stood, his voice dripping with false concern. "This is completely unacceptable. I saw the whole thing. This waiter was carelessly rushing, not paying attention. We should have him arrested for assault." Charlotte's eyes remained fixed on Daniel, but something flickered in them when Preston spoke. "You saw everything, Preston?" "Every second. Gross negligence. I'll call security myself." "That won't be necessary." Charlotte's voice was ice. "I saw it too. I saw your foot." The color drained from Preston's face. "I don't know what you're—" "Sit down, Preston. We'll discuss your sudden clumsiness later." She turned back to Daniel, who remained frozen on his knees, processing what his trained eye was telling him. The bracelet wasn't for Charlotte. She was wearing it for someone else. Someone young. Someone dying. Daniel's mind raced through the diagnostic possibilities. The specific pattern of her stress. The particular way she carried exhaustion in her body. This was a mother watching her child fade. He'd seen it too many times, had been on the other side of it with his own daughter. "Stand up," Charlotte commanded. Daniel rose slowly, aware of the hundreds of eyes upon him. The security guards were close now, waiting for her word. "Your name?" "Daniel Cross, ma'am." Something shifted in her expression, a flicker of recognition that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Cross? Why does that name—" She stopped herself. "You're fired, obviously." Daniel's heart sank. "Please, Miss Mercer. I have a daughter. She's sick. I need this job." "A daughter," Charlotte's voice sharpened. "How old?" 8. "What's wrong with her?" The question was unexpected, almost invasive, but something in Charlotte's tone made Daniel answer honestly. "Dilated cardiomyopathy secondary to viral myocarditis. She's on the transplant list, but she's stable for now. The medications are just expensive." Charlotte studied him for a long moment. Around them, the gala guests began to whisper, their patience for the drama waning, but Charlotte seemed oblivious to their discomfort. "The bracelet," Daniel said suddenly, the words escaping before he could stop them. "It's not yours. The medical code on the inside, I can see part of it from here. Hypoplastic left heart syndrome, stage 3 palliation failure." Charlotte went rigid. "How could you possibly—" "Because I wrote the initial protocol for that coding system. 12 years ago at Johns Hopkins." Daniel met her gaze steadily. "The blue in your nails, it's not your oxygenation that's compromised. It's psychological cyanosis. Parents of HLHS children sometimes develop it, a sympathetic response. I've seen it in mothers whose children are entering heart failure." The room might as well have disappeared. Charlotte stared at him as if he'd reached into her chest and grabbed her heart with his bare hands. "You're saying you're a doctor?" "I was. Pediatric cardiac surgeon. I haven't practiced in 3 years." "Why?" The question hung between them like a bridge over an abyss. Daniel could lie, could fabricate something palatable. But something about this moment, about the desperation he recognized in her eyes because he saw it in his own mirror every morning, made him tell the truth. My wife died on my operating table. Amniotic fluid embolism during emergency cesarean. I tried to save her, but I failed. The hospital board cleared me, but her family, they had connections. Accusations were made. My license wasn't revoked, but my reputation was destroyed. No hospital would touch me after that. Charlotte absorbed this information, her analytical CEO mind clearly processing, calculating. Then she did something that made every person in the room gasp. She stepped forward, wine still dripping from her ruined suit, and placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "The Yamamoto cross procedure," she said quietly. "You're that cross? The one who theorized the synthetic graft technique for single ventricle physiology?" Daniel's breath caught. "How do you get—" "Because every pediatric cardiac surgeon in the world has told me it's impossible, that the doctor who proposed it was brilliant but insane, that even if someone could perform it, that someone disappeared 3 years ago after killing his wife through gross negligence." "That's not what happened," Daniel said, heat rising in his voice for the first time in years. "Sarah's death was—" "I don't care what happened," Charlotte interrupted. "I care about what you can do now." She turned to Marcus, who stood frozen nearby. "This man no longer works for you." "Ms. Mercer, I'm so sorry about—" "He works for me now." She turned back to Daniel. "You're coming with me. Tonight." "I don't understand. My daughter is 11 years old. Her name is Grace. 6 different surgical teams have told me she has less than 6 months to live. The hypoplastic left heart syndrome has progressed beyond current surgical intervention. She's too sick for a transplant, even if a heart became available." Charlotte's voice remained steady, but Daniel could see the effort it took. "Every specialist has given up, but you wrote about a theoretical procedure that could save her." "Theoretical," Daniel emphasized. "It's never been attempted. The risk of doing nothing is 100% mortality." Charlotte's eyes blazed. "So I'll ask you once. Can you save my daughter?" The question landed like a physical blow. Daniel thought of his own daughter, of the nights he'd spent watching her sleep, counting her breaths, praying for a miracle he couldn't provide. He thought of the last surgery he'd performed. Sarah's blood on his hands, the sound of the monitors flatlining despite everything he'd tried. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but it's possible." Daniel closed his eyes, seeing the procedure in his mind, the synthetic graft he'd designed but never built, the precise angles required for the anastomosis, the revolutionary approach to rerouting blood flow in a heart that was essentially half-formed. It had lived in his head for 15 years, refined through thousands of mental iterations. "Theoretically, yes, but I haven't held a scalpel in 3 years. I haven't—" "I'll give you everything you need, a full surgical team, a lab to develop the graft, unlimited resources. I'll pay for your daughter's treatment, all of it, including any experimental procedures she might need. I'll clear your name, hire the best lawyers to restore your license without restrictions." The offer was staggering. Around them, the crowd pressed closer, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. "Ms. Mercer," Preston Vale interjected, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "This is highly inappropriate. This man just assaulted you. This man," Charlotte said without looking at Preston, "might be the only person alive who can save Grace. And you just tried to sabotage that by tripping him." She finally turned to face the board member, her expression lethal. "We'll be discussing your resignation tomorrow, Preston. Now get out of my sight before I have security escort you out." Preston's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but he had enough self-preservation to retreat, pushing through the crowd toward the exit. Charlotte turned back to Daniel. "Your answer?" "I need to see her medical records, all of them, every echo, every cath, every surgical report." "They're in my car." "You carry your daughter's complete medical records in your car?" For the first time, Charlotte's composure cracked slightly. "Wouldn't you?" Daniel thought of the folder in his own apartment, Lila's records meticulously organized, memorized, analyzed for any sign of hope. "Yes." "Then you'll look at them?" "I'll look, but I'm not promising anything. If the anatomy isn't suitable for the procedure, if the tissue is too damaged, I understand, but you'll try? The weight of the moment pressed down on him. 3 years of hiding, of running from his gift because it had failed him when he needed it most. 3 years of watching his daughter suffer while denying himself the ability to help others. 3 years of penance that had saved no one. Dad? The small voice cut through the crowd like a lightning bolt. Daniel spun to see Lila standing at the service entrance, her small frame dwarfed by the doorway, the portable oxygen concentrator at her side, humming quietly. Marcus stood behind her, looking apologetic. She insisted, Marcus explained. Said you promised to show her the city lights from up here after your shift. Lila's eyes were wide as she took in the scene. Her father on his knees in front of a wine-soaked woman, surrounded by people in clothes that cost more than their apartment rent for a year. But she didn't seem intimidated. Instead, she walked forward with the careful gait of a child who'd learned to conserve energy, stopping beside Daniel and slipping her small hand into his. Did you spill something, Dad? She asked, noticing the wine bottle on the floor. Yes, sweetheart. I made a mistake. It's okay. Everyone makes mistakes. You told me that's how we learn, remember? Charlotte knelt down, bringing herself to Lila's eye level. The movement was careful, controlled, the movement of someone accustomed to being around fragile children. You must be Lila, she said softly. Lila nodded, studying Charlotte with the direct gaze children possess before the world teaches them to look away. You have pretty eyes, but they look sad, like my dad's when he thinks I'm sleeping. Charlotte's breath hitched. My daughter is sick, like you. Oh, Lila considered this. Is she scared? Terrified. Me too sometimes. But Dad says being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing what needs to be done anyway. She looked up at Daniel. Right, Dad? Daniel's throat was too tight to speak. He nodded. Charlotte stood slowly, her decision crystallizing. Your father is a very brave man, Lila, and I think my daughter would like to meet you. Would that be okay? Lila brightened. Does she like puzzles? I'm really good at puzzles. Dad says it's because I see patterns others miss. She loves puzzles. Charlotte's voice was thick with emotion. She looked at Daniel. It seems like it runs in the family, seeing patterns others miss. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, pressing it into Daniel's free hand. My driver is outside. The medical records are in the back seat. Look at them tonight. Call me by morning with your decision. Ms. Mercer, Charlotte, if you're going to potentially save my daughter's life, you should probably call me Charlotte. Daniel looked at the card, then at his daughter, whose eyes were bright with curiosity, despite the exhaustion he could see pulling at her features. He thought of Grace Mercer lying in a bed somewhere, her half-formed heart struggling with each beat. He thought of Sarah, who would have grabbed his face and told him to stop wallowing and start saving lives again. I'll look tonight, he said, but I need you to understand, even if I agree, even if the anatomy is suitable, the chance of success is less than 20%. Maybe less than 10. That's 10% more than anyone else has offered. Charlotte straightened, and for a moment the CEO mask slipped back into place. She addressed the crowd that had pressed close to witness the exchange. The show's over. Enjoy the rest of your evening. The bar is open, courtesy of Galaxy Corporation. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring excitedly about what they'd witnessed. Charlotte turned to leave, then paused. Daniel? That night with your wife? I know what happened. The real story, not the one her family spread. I have friends on the Hopkins board. What you did? Trying to save her while she was carrying your child? Operating on your own wife because you were the only one in the building qualified to attempt that procedure. That wasn't negligence. That was heroism. Daniel's eyes burned. Heroism would have been saving her. No. Heroism was trying when everyone else had already given up. She met his gaze one last time. I'll be waiting for your call. She walked away, her wine-stained suit worn like armor, her shoulders set with the determination of a mother who'd just played her last card. Daniel stood in the middle of the abandoned battlefield of champagne flutes and whispered gossip, his daughter's hand warm in his, the business card heavy as a surgical instrument in his other hand. Dad? Lila tugged at his sleeve. Are you going to help her daughter? He looked down at his own child, this brave little soul who faced each day with tubes and medications and the shadow of mortality hanging over her like a storm cloud she refused to acknowledge. "I don't know, baby. It's complicated." "The best things usually are," Lila said with the wisdom of a child who'd grown up too fast. "But that's never stopped you before." Marcus approached cautiously. "Daniel, I have to ask, are you really leaving tonight?" Daniel looked at the head waiter, this man who'd given him a chance when no one else would, who'd overlooked his overqualification and his shaking hands and his desperate need for any income at all. "I might be, Marcus." "I'm sorry." Marcus shook his head. "Don't be. I knew you weren't meant for this life. You've got steadier hands carrying 10 champagne glasses than any waiter I've ever trained, but they weren't meant for carrying drinks." He gestured at the medical alert bracelet on Lila's thin wrist. "They were meant for saving kids like her. I haven't saved anyone in 3 years. Maybe it's time to start again." Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, Charlotte's. "The car is waiting outside. Grace is at Mount Sinai, room 412. If you want to see her tonight, I can arrange it." He showed the text to Lila. "What do you think, sweetheart? Want to meet a new friend?" Lila nodded enthusiastically, then yawned, her energy fading. "Can we see the city lights first?" "You promised." Daniel scooped her up, her weight negligible in his arms, and carried her to the massive windows. Manhattan sprawled below them, millions of lights creating constellations of human ambition and hope. Lila rested her head against his shoulder, her breath warm against his neck. "Dad?" "Yeah, baby?" "Mom would want you to help that girl." The words hit him like a physical blow. They rarely talked about Sarah directly, the wound still too raw even after 3 years. "How do you know that?" "Because she was brave like you, and being brave means being scared and doing what needs to be done anyway," Daniel finished. "Exactly." They stood there for a few more minutes, watching the city pulse with life below them. Then Daniel carried his daughter to the elevator, leaving behind the shattered wine bottle, the abandoned serving tray, and 3 years of hiding from who he really was. The elevator descended in silence, each floor marking a transition from the life he'd been living to the one he'd abandoned. By the time they reached the ground floor, Daniel had made his decision. The town car was idling at the curb, black and gleaming like a surgical instrument. The driver, a professional-looking man in his 50s, opened the door without a word. The back seat was empty, except for 3 banker's boxes filled with medical records, imaging studies, and surgical reports. Daniel settled Lila in first, making sure she was comfortable, then pulled out the first folder. Even in the dim light of the car's interior, he could see the familiar patterns: echocardiogram results, cardiac catheterization reports, surgical summaries from the world's best pediatric cardiac surgeons. Each one ended with the same conclusion: inoperable. "Sir?" the driver said. "Ms. Mercer wanted me to ask, the hospital or home?" Daniel looked at Lila, who was already falling asleep against the leather seat, her breathing slightly labored but steady. He opened the folder fully, angling it toward the reading light. Grace Mercer's most recent echo showed a heart that shouldn't still be beating, architecture so complex and malformed that most surgeons wouldn't even attempt palliative care. But Daniel wasn't most surgeons. In his mind, he could already see the synthetic graft taking shape, the impossible angles that might create a functional circulation. His hands, steady for the first time in 3 years, traced the paths blood would need to take. "The hospital," he said. "I need to see the patient." The driver nodded and pulled into traffic. Daniel continued reading, each page revealing more of the challenge ahead. Grace had undergone 3 surgeries already, each one buying time but ultimately failing to address the fundamental problem. Her heart was incompatible with life. Except maybe it wasn't. The Yamamoto cross procedure had lived in theoretical papers and conference presentations for over a decade, deemed too risky, too revolutionary, too impossible by the medical establishment. It required not just surgical skill, but an ability to visualize cardiac architecture in 4 dimensions, 3 of space and 1 of time, understanding how the heart would grow and adapt over years to come. Daniel had that ability. It was what had made him legendary at Hopkins, what had drawn patients from around the world. He could see hearts not as they were, but as they could be given the right intervention. His phone rang. Charlotte. Did you look? I'm looking now. We're heading to the hospital. And? The anatomy is more complex than I expected, but... He paused, studying a particularly detailed angiogram. There's a fenestration in the atrial septum that wasn't noted in the reports. It's small, but it might give us the anchor point we need for the superior aspect of the graft. There was silence on the other end then. No one else saw that. They weren't looking for it. They were looking at what is, not what could be. Can you do it? Daniel looked at Lila, sleeping peacefully, despite the oxygen tubes, despite the uncertain future that awaited her. He thought of Grace Mercer, 11 years old, fighting for each heartbeat. I need a team. Not just any team. I need specific people. Karen Yamamoto from Seattle Children's. She's the only one who understands the graft material well enough. Tom Bradley from Boston for perfusion. He can maintain circulation longer than anyone else. Angela Cruz from Texas for anesthesia. She's managed cases other anesthesiologists wouldn't touch. Done. All of them. What else? Time to develop the graft. It can't be off the shelf. It needs to be customized to Grace's specific anatomy. That means 3D printing, biocompatibility testing, stress analysis. Minimum 2 weeks, possibly 3. She might not have 3 weeks. Then we start tonight. I'll need access to a bioengineering lab. Galaxy Corp has one. I'll have it cleared and staffed within the hour. Charlotte, even with everything perfect, the odds... I know the odds. I've heard them from 12 different surgeons, but you're the 13th, and 13 has always been my lucky number. That's not very scientific for a CEO. Nothing about watching your child die is scientific. It's pure emotion, pure desperation, pure hope against hope. Her voice cracked slightly. Will you do it? Daniel closed his eyes, seeing the procedure unfolding in his mind. The precise cuts, the delicate sutures, the moment when blood would either flow through new pathways or not. He saw Sarah's face, not twisted in death, but smiling, proud, telling him to get back to work. Yes, he said. I'll do it. Thank you. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a mother's entire world. Don't thank me yet. We have a long way to go. I know, but for the first time in 6 months, I have something I didn't have before. What's that? Hope. The car pulled up to Mount Sinai's emergency entrance. Daniel gently woke Lila, who rubbed her eyes and looked around in confusion. Are we at the hospital? Am I sick? No, baby. We're here to meet someone. Is that okay? She nodded, trust absolute in her eyes. Daniel helped her out of the car, making sure her portable oxygen was secure. They walked through the automatic doors, past the chaos of the emergency room, toward the elevators that would take them to the pediatric cardiac unit. The 4th floor was quieter, the lights dimmed for the night. Room 4012 was at the end of the hall, its door slightly open, soft light spilling into the corridor. Daniel knocked gently. Come in. Charlotte sat beside a bed that seemed too large for its occupant. Grace Mercer was small for 11, her growth stunted by years of inadequate oxygenation. She was awake, propped up on pillows, an iPad in her lap showing what looked like a complex mathematical equation. You must be Dr. Cross, she said, her voice surprisingly strong. Mom says you might be able to fix my heart. Daniel approached the bed, Lila beside him. I'm going to try, and this is my daughter, Lila. Grace's eyes lit up. You have oxygen too. She gestured to her own nasal cannula. Twins! Lila giggled, the sound bright in the sterile room. Does yours make your nose itch? All the time. Mom, can Lila sit on the bed? Charlotte looked at Daniel, who nodded. Lila climbed up carefully, settling beside Grace as if they'd known each other for years. What are you working on? Lila asked, pointing at the iPad. Fluid dynamics equations. I'm trying to understand how blood flows through different vessel configurations. Grace's eyes were bright with intelligence. Mom says if I understand my condition better, I won't be as scared. Daniel moved closer, looking at the equations. They were college level, perhaps graduate level. These are impressive. Where did you learn this? Online courses mostly. Regular school is hard with all the hospital visits, so I study on my own. She looked at him directly. I've read your papers. The theoretical framework for the synthetic graft. The math is beautiful. You understood them? Most of it. The topology gets complex when you're dealing with non-Euclidean surfaces, but I think I grasped the basic concept. She paused. Is it going to hurt? Daniel sat on the edge of the bed. Yes. I won't lie to you about that. Recovery will be difficult. More difficult than dying? The blunt question hung in the air. Charlotte started to speak, but Grace held up a hand. I'm 11, not stupid. I know what's happening to my body. I can feel it getting harder every day, each breath a little less satisfying than the last. She looked at Daniel with eyes too old for her face. So, I'll ask again, will it hurt more than dying? No, Daniel said simply. It won't. Then when do we start? I need to build your graft first, design it specifically for your heart. It'll take a couple of weeks. I can wait a couple of weeks. She turned to Lila. Will you visit me? It gets boring here. Every day if Dad says it's okay. Daniel met Charlotte's eyes over the girls' heads. There was so much to discuss. Consent forms, risk stratification, surgical planning, the very real possibility of failure. But watching their daughters connect, two children facing mortality with more courage than most adults could muster, he felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. Purpose. The wine stain on Charlotte's suit had long since dried, leaving abstract patterns across the expensive fabric. But neither of them seemed to notice or care. The universe had orchestrated this moment through spilled wine and cruel pranks and desperate circumstances, bringing together a disgraced surgeon, a desperate mother, and two children who deserved better than what fate had dealt them. Dr. Cross, Grace said, pulling his attention back, Mom says you haven't operated in 3 years. Are you scared? Daniel considered lying, offering reassurance he didn't feel. But something about this child demanded honesty. Terrified, he admitted. Good. Grace smiled, and for a moment, despite the blue tinge to her lips and the shadows under her eyes, she looked like any other 11-year-old. Lila's dad told her being brave means being scared and doing what needs to be done anyway. I think that's the best definition I've heard. Me too, Charlotte said softly. So we're all going to be brave together? Lila asked. Together, Grace confirmed, reaching for Lila's hand. Daniel stood, his mind already racing with preparations. He'd need to review every surgical note from the past 3 years, catch up on any advances in technique or technology. He'd need to rebuild his hand strength, his stamina. He'd need to construct not just a graft, but a miracle. I should get started, he said. The sooner I begin the design process, Daniel, Charlotte stood as well. There's something else you should know. Preston Vale, the man who tripped you, he sits on the board of Hartman Pharmaceuticals. They manufacture the anti-rejection drugs Grace would need post-surgery. He's going to try to block access. Let him try. Daniel's voice carried an edge it had him. I know Preston's history. I know about the Medicare fraud his company covered up in 2019. I kept documentation. If he wants to play games with a child's life, he'll find I'm not the same broken man who was serving him champagne tonight. Charlotte's smile was sharp as a scalpel. I knew there was a reason I liked you. We should go, Daniel said to Lila. Let Grace rest. 5 more minutes, both girls said in unison, then dissolved into giggles. Daniel and Charlotte stepped into the hallway, leaving the door cracked so they could watch their daughters. This is insane, Charlotte said quietly. I'm entrusting my daughter's life to a man I met 2 hours ago. You're entrusting her life to a surgeon who happens to have been serving drinks 2 hours ago, Daniel corrected. There's a difference. Is there? You haven't touched a scalpel in 3 years. The hands forget nothing. It's the mind that needs to remember. Remember why we do this, why we take these risks. He looked through the crack at the two girls, now sharing videos on Grace's iPad. I forgot for a while, but I remember now. Because of Lila? Because of both of them. Because children like them deserve every chance, every impossible surgery, every theoretical procedure that might buy them more time. He paused. Your daughter is brilliant, by the way. Those equations, she's not just memorizing them, she understands them. She got that from her father. He was a mathematician before he died. Car accident when she was 3. Charlotte's voice was steady, but pain flickered in her eyes. He would have loved this. The elegance of your procedure, the mathematical precision required. He always said the heart was just a pump governed by fluid dynamics and electrical impulses. He was wrong, Daniel said. It's much more than that. It's the seat of courage, the source of hope. Every beat is an act of defiance against entropy. That's very poetic for a surgeon. My wife was a poet. She rubbed off on me. Daniel smiled at the memory. She used to say that surgery was just poetry with sharper instruments. I think I would have liked her. She would have liked you too. She had a thing for brave women. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their daughters through the door. Finally, Charlotte spoke. The lab will be ready by the time you get there. I've sent the access codes to your phone. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, just ask. What I need is for you to prepare yourself for the possibility that this won't work. I'm prepared for that. I've been prepared for that for 6 months. What I wasn't prepared for was hope. She turned to face him fully. You gave me that tonight. Even if it ends badly, I'll always be grateful for these weeks of believing it's possible. Daniel extended his hand. Partners? She shook it, her grip firm. Partners. The bioengineering lab at Galaxy Corporation occupied the entire 32nd floor, its clean rooms and specialized equipment worth more than most hospital wings. Daniel stood before the main entrance at 11:47 p.m., Lila sleeping against his shoulder, her breath warm and steady against his neck. The security guard, clearly briefed on his arrival, opened the doors without question. Dr. Cross? Ms. Mercer said you'd be coming. I'm James. I'll be here all night if you need anything. Daniel nodded his thanks and carried Lila inside. The lab was a marvel of modern medical engineering, 3D printers capable of working with biocompatible materials, stress testing equipment that could simulate decades of cardiac cycles in hours, and computers powerful enough to model blood flow at the cellular level. He settled Lila on a couch in the adjacent office, covering her with his jacket. She stirred slightly, mumbling something about grace and puzzles before settling back into sleep. Daniel watched her for a moment, then turned to face the challenge ahead. The first thing he did was spread Grace's medical records across the massive conference table, creating a timeline of her cardiac journey from birth to present. Each surgery had bought time, but added scar tissue. Each intervention had saved her life, but complicated future options. By the time he'd finished organizing everything, it was past 1 in the morning. His phone buzzed, a text from Charlotte. Can't sleep, neither can Grace. She's asking about the math behind the graft. May I bring her down? Daniel looked at the complex equations he'd started sketching on the whiteboard. Yes, she might actually help. 20 minutes later, Charlotte wheeled Grace into the lab, IV pole in tow. The girl's eyes widened as she took in the equipment. This is incredible, she breathed. Is that a bioprinter? Latest model, Daniel confirmed. It can print tissues at the cellular level, layering different materials to match the mechanical properties of native tissue. Grace wheeled herself closer to the whiteboard where Daniel had been working. You're using Navier-Stokes equations to model the flow, but have you considered the non-Newtonian properties of blood at the small vessel level? Daniel stared at her. That's actually a very good point. At the dimensions we're working with, blood doesn't behave like a simple fluid. I've been thinking about it, Grace said, producing her iPad. I modified the equations to account for shear thinning behavior. Look. Charlotte settled into a chair, watching with amazement as her 11-year-old daughter engaged in graduate-level fluid dynamics with a cardiac surgeon. I don't understand a word they're saying, she murmured to the half-sleeping Lila, who had woken when they entered. Me neither, Lila admitted, rubbing her eyes. But look how happy they are. It was true. For the first time since Daniel had met her, Grace's face was animated with pure intellectual joy, the shadows of illness temporarily forgotten. And Daniel, he was fully alive in a way he hadn't been since Sarah's death, his mind firing on all cylinders as he worked through the mathematical complexities with a child who understood them better than most of his former colleagues. If we adjust the graph geometry here, Grace pointed to a specific junction, we can reduce the Reynolds number and minimize turbulence. But that would increase the pressure gradient, Daniel countered. Not if we incorporate a subtle helical flow pattern. Nature does it in the aortic arch. It's why we don't get more turbulence despite the curve. Daniel stepped back, seeing it suddenly. You're right. God, you're absolutely right. A helical flow inducer at the proximal anastomosis. It would require precise angular alignment, but it would work, Grace finished. The math says it would work. They worked for another 2 hours, Grace's energy seemingly endless despite her condition. Charlotte dozed in her chair while Lila curled up beside her, the two mothers and daughters creating an unlikely family in the sterile environment of the lab. Finally, Grace's eyes began to droop. I should probably rest, she admitted reluctantly. You've given me enough to work with for days, Daniel said. Thank you, Grace. You might have just solved our biggest problem. As Charlotte prepared to wheel Grace back to her room, the girl looked back at Daniel. Dr. Cross? You're not like the other doctors. How so? You listen. You don't pretend to have all the answers, and you see me as more than just a broken heart. Daniel's throat tightened. You are more than that. So much more. After they left, Daniel returned to his work with renewed vigor. The helical flow concept Grace had suggested was brilliant, but implementing it would require precision beyond anything he'd attempted before. He began designing the graph in the computer, each dimension calculated to the micrometer. The sun was rising by the time he looked up again, painting the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and pink. Lila was awake, watching him from the couch. Did you sleep at all, Dad? Couldn't. Too many ideas. Mom used to say that. When she was writing, she'd stay up all night because the words wouldn't stop coming. Daniel moved to sit beside his daughter, pulling her close. Do you remember much about her? Some things. Her laugh, the way she smelled like vanilla. How she used to dance with you in the kitchen when she thought I was asleep. You were awake for that? Always. It was my favorite thing to watch. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city wake up below them. Then Lila asked, Are you going to save Grace? I'm going to try. That's not what I asked. Daniel looked at his daughter, this wise soul in a fragile body. I don't know, but for the first time in 3 years, I think it's possible. Good, because I like her. And her mom is nice. She doesn't look at me like I'm sick. She just looks at me like I'm Lila. Is that rare? You have no idea. Daniel's phone rang, an unknown number with a Seattle area code. Dr. Cross, this is Karen Yamamoto. Charlotte Mercer called me at an ungodly hour with an offer I couldn't refuse. When do you need me in New York? Dr. Yamamoto. Daniel's pulse quickened. I didn't think you'd come. Are you kidding? The chance to actually implement the Yamamoto cross procedure? I've been waiting 15 years for this. Plus, Charlotte mentioned you've solved the turbulence problem we could never figure out. Actually, an 11-year-old girl solved it. The patient? Charlotte mentioned she was brilliant. I'm booking a flight now. I can be there by tomorrow. Bring your research on the polymer composites. We need to modify the surface properties to encourage endothelialization while preventing thrombosis. Already packed. Tom Bradley's coming too. He's actually excited, which for Tom is saying something. After coordinating with Karen, Daniel made similar calls to the other specialists Charlotte had promised to recruit. Each one agreed immediately, drawn by the challenge and the chance to make medical history. By noon, he had assembled a team that any hospital in the world would envy. Charlotte arrived at lunch with food from a restaurant Daniel couldn't pronounce, let alone afford. She looked exhausted but determined. How's Grace? Sleeping, finally. She was up until 5 working on flow dynamics. Charlotte shook her head. I've never seen her that engaged. You gave her purpose beyond just surviving. She gave me the same thing. They ate in companionable silence while Lila played with a puzzle Charlotte had brought. Then Charlotte's phone rang. Her expression darkened as she listened. "What is it?" Daniel asked when she hung up. "Preston Vale. He's called an emergency board meeting. He's trying to block Galaxy Corp from funding the surgery, claiming it's an inappropriate use of company resources. Can he do that?" "He can try. He owns 8% of the company's stock and has allies on the board." Charlotte's jaw tightened. "But I own 32% and have my own allies. It'll be a fight." "When's the meeting?" "Tomorrow morning, which means I need to leave soon to prepare." She looked torn. "I hate leaving Grace, but—" "Go," Daniel said. "I'll check on her. Lila wanted to visit anyway." "You do that?" "Charlotte, we're partners now. Your fight is my fight." She stood to leave, then paused. "Daniel, what Preston said at the gala about seeing everything, he was lying, wasn't he? He tripped you on purpose." "Yes." "Why would he do that?" Daniel considered his words carefully. "Preston was on the board at Johns Hopkins when I was there. He pushed for my resignation after Sarah died. He has pharmaceutical interests that would benefit if certain surgical procedures remained theoretical rather than becoming practical. The Yamamoto Cross procedure, if successful, would eliminate the need for multiple palliative surgeries and their associated drug regimens. It would cost his companies millions." Charlotte's expression turned lethal. "So this isn't just about being petty. It's about money." "It always is with Preston." "Then I'll destroy him." The casual certainty in her voice was chilling. "Nobody threatens my daughter's life for profit." After Charlotte left, Daniel took Lila to visit Grace. They found her working on her iPad again, but she set it aside immediately when they entered. "Lila, I solved another problem with the flow dynamics. Want to see?" While the girls bonded over mathematics, neither fully understood but both appreciated, Daniel reviewed Grace's latest test results. Her cardiac output was declining faster than anticipated. The 2 to 3 weeks he'd estimated for graft development might be optimistic. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You should have stayed away from the Mercer situation. Some things are better left theoretical. PV." Daniel deleted the message without responding. Preston Vale had tried to destroy him once. He wouldn't get a second chance. That evening, Karen Yamamoto arrived earlier than expected, bursting into the lab with the energy of someone half her age. "Daniel Cross," she said, pulling him into an unexpected hug. "I thought you were dead." "Just hiding." "Same difference in our field." She pulled back, studying him. "You look terrible." "Thanks. You haven't changed at all." "Lies, but I'll take them." She moved to the whiteboard, examining his work. "This is elegant. The helical flow inducer. Whose idea?" "Grace Mercer's." "The patient?" Charlotte wasn't exaggerating about her intelligence. Karen started unpacking her bags, pulling out hard drives and printed research. "I've been working on the polymer composition. I think I've solved the degradation problem we faced in the early prototypes." They worked through the night, Lila curled up on the couch again, this time with blankets Charlotte had sent. Karen's expertise with the graft materials complemented Daniel's surgical planning perfectly. By morning, they had a working prototype design. Tom Bradley arrived with the sunrise, as taciturn as ever, but with a glint of excitement in his eyes. "Cross," he said by way of greeting. "Heard you've been serving drinks." "Beats fishing, which is what I heard you've been doing." "Fishing's honest work." Tom examined the graft design on the computer. "This is ambitious. Bypass time will be at least 4 hours, maybe 5. Can you maintain her that long?" "I maintained that kid in Baltimore for 6 hours, remember? The one everyone said couldn't survive surgery?" "I remember. She's in college now." "Pre-med, last I heard." Tom's expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry about Sarah, Daniel. We all are." "I know." "You sure you're ready for this?" Daniel looked at his steady hands, then at Lila sleeping peacefully despite all the chaos around her. "I have to be." Charlotte called at 7 a.m. "Board meeting's in an hour. Wish me luck." "You don't need luck. You have the truth on your side." "Sometimes that's not enough." "It will be today." The board meeting, Daniel learned later, was a massacre. Charlotte had come prepared with financial projections showing that the positive publicity from funding revolutionary pediatric cardiac surgery would far outweigh the costs. She'd also somehow acquired documentation of Preston's pharmaceutical conflicts of interest, which she deployed with surgical precision. Preston was voted off the board by a margin of 12-3. He looked like he wanted to murder someone when he left, Charlotte told Daniel over the phone. Security is escorting him from the building now. He'll try something else. Preston doesn't give up easily. Let him try. I've got lawyers who eat corporate raiders for breakfast. But Preston's next move wasn't legal. It was personal. That afternoon, while Daniel was deep in graft construction, Child Protective Services arrived at the lab. Dr. Cross, we've received a complaint about child endangerment. We need to speak with you about your daughter. Daniel's blood went cold. What complaint? That you're keeping a medically fragile child in a non-residential setting without proper care while you work. Daniel looked at Lila, who was reading in the office, well cared for and comfortable. She's with me. The building has medical facilities. She's safer here than... Sir, we need to evaluate the situation. If you could come with us... He's not going anywhere. Charlotte's voice cut through the room like a blade. She stood in the doorway with 3 lawyers in tow. I'm Charlotte Mercer, CEO of this facility. This child is here under my supervision with full medical support available. Here's documentation of the medical facilities, the on-site nursing staff, and the emergency protocols in place. The CPS workers reviewed the documents, clearly overwhelmed by the legal firepower facing them. Additionally, Charlotte continued, I'd like to know who filed this complaint. Because filing a false CPS report is a felony, and we have security footage of everyone who's entered this building. The workers exchanged glances. The complaint was anonymous. How convenient. Well, as you can see, there's no endangerment here. Unless you have a warrant, I'll have to ask you to leave. After they left, Charlotte turned to Daniel. Preston? Without question. I'll handle it. You focus on the graft. But Daniel couldn't focus, not with the threat hanging over Lila. He pulled his daughter close, feeling her fragile heartbeat against his chest. Dad? Why were those people here? Someone told a lie about us. But Charlotte fixed it. She's good at fixing things, Lila observed. Like you. That night, Grace took a turn for the worse. Her oxygen saturation dropped precipitously, and she was moved to the ICU. Daniel and his team rushed to the hospital. We might not have 2 weeks, the ICU attending said grimly. Maybe not even 1 week. Daniel looked at the partially constructed graft in the sterile container he'd brought. It was barely 60% complete, but the basic structure was there. Karen, how long to finish if we work continuously? 72 hours minimum, and that's without testing. Then we test while we build. Tom, can you start preparing the surgical suite? You're not serious, the attending said. You can't attempt this procedure without a fully tested graft. Watch me. The next 72 hours blurred together in a marathon of construction, testing, and refinement. The entire team moved into the lab, catching fragments of sleep between work sessions. Grace stabilized but remained critical. Charlotte never left her side except to bring coffee and updates. Angela Cruz arrived from Texas on the second day, taking one look at the situation and immediately understanding the stakes. When I agreed to this, I didn't realize we'd be racing against time, she said. Would it have changed your answer? Daniel asked. No, just would have brought more coffee. They worked with an intensity that bordered on manic. The graft took shape layer by layer, each component tested and retested. Grace contributed from her hospital bed via video link, suggesting refinements that her unique understanding of the mathematics made possible. On the morning of the 3rd day, Daniel's hands began to shake. Not from nerves, but from exhaustion. Karen forced him to rest for 2 hours while she completed the final polymer coating. He dreamed of Sarah standing in an OR, her hands guiding his. You can do this, she said. You were meant to do this. I couldn't save you. You couldn't save me because I couldn't be saved, but Grace can be. So save her. He woke to find Lila watching him, her small hand in his. Mom? She asked. Yeah, baby, Mom. She told me in my dream that you're going to save Grace. I hope she's right. Mom's always right. She was right about you being brave. The graft was completed at 4:47 a.m. on the 4th day. It looked deceptively simple. a piece of synthetic material shaped into an impossible geometry that would either revolutionize pediatric cardiac surgery or fail spectacularly. "It's beautiful," Karen said, exhaustion evident in her voice, "in a terrifying way." "Like all the best innovations," Tom added. Daniel held the container up to the light, examining every angle. It was perfect, or as perfect as they could make it with the time they had. "Call Charlotte. Tell her we're ready." The surgery was scheduled for the following morning. Daniel spent the intervening hours in the hospital's simulation lab, practicing the procedure on 3D printed models of Grace's heart. His hands remembered the precise movements, the delicate dance of suture and scalpel. That evening, he visited Grace one last time before the surgery. "Are you scared?" she asked. "Terrified." "Good, that means you care. That means you—" "I do care, Grace, more than you know." "I know," she said simply. "I can see it in how carefully you planned everything, every angle, every calculation. It's not just surgery to you, it's art." Charlotte stood by the window, tears streaming silently down her face. "Grace, baby, you don't have to be brave for us." "I'm not being brave for you, Mom. I'm being brave for me. Because I want to see what happens next. I want to go to college and study mathematics properly. I want to fall in love and have my heart broken in the normal way, not the literal way." She looked at Daniel. "And I want to see Lila grow up to be as brilliant as her father." Daniel's professional composure cracked. "We're going to do everything possible. I know, and if it doesn't work, I need you to know something." Grace reached for his hand. "You gave me hope. For the first time in my life, someone looked at my heart and saw possibility instead of just problems. That's a gift, regardless of what happens tomorrow." That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He reviewed every aspect of the procedure, visualized every potential complication and its solution. Lila stayed with Charlotte in a hotel room Charlotte had booked near the hospital, the two of them keeping each other company through the anxious hours. At 5 a.m., Daniel stood in the scrub room, watching his hands under the surgical lights. They were perfectly steady. Sarah's voice echoed in his memory. "Your hands were made for this. Don't waste that gift." Karen entered, already in her surgical cap. "Ready?" "No, but that's never stopped me before." "Good, because that little girl is counting on us to be better than ready. She needs us to be extraordinary." "Then that's what we'll be." Tom and Angela were already in the OR, making their final preparations. The anesthesia equipment hummed with quiet efficiency. The heart-lung bypass machine stood ready, waiting to take over Grace's circulation for the hours required to rebuild her heart. Charlotte and Grace had said their goodbyes in the pre-op area. Charlotte now stood in the observation deck, Lila beside her, both of them pressed against the glass. Daniel entered the OR, and everything else fell away. There was only the table, the patient, the impossible task ahead. "Time out," Angela said, following protocol. "Patient is Grace Mercer, medical record number 447892. Procedure is synthetic graft placement for hypoplastic left heart syndrome via the Yamamoto cross technique." "Confirmed," the team responded in unison. Daniel looked up at the observation deck, meeting Charlotte's eyes. She nodded once. "Scalpel," Daniel said, and began. The initial incision was perfect, muscle memory taking over despite the 3-year hiatus. The chest opened like a book, revealing the anatomical complexity that had defeated so many before him. Grace's heart was a marvel of survival, functioning despite architecture that shouldn't have allowed it to beat at all. "Starting bypass," Tom announced. The heart-lung machine took over and Grace's malformed heart stopped beating. For the next 4 hours, Daniel worked with a precision that bordered on supernatural. Every suture was placed with microscopic accuracy. The graft, their impossible creation, was positioned using the helical flow pattern Grace herself had suggested. "Superior anastomosis complete," he announced, starting inferior attachment. This was the critical moment. The angle had to be perfect. Too acute, and the flow would turbulate. Too obtuse, and the pressure would cause failure. Daniel's hands moved with absolute certainty, guided by years of experience and days of planning. "That's beautiful," Karen breathed. "The geometry is perfect." But perfection in theory didn't always translate to perfection in practice. As Daniel completed the final suture line, he He noticed something that made his blood run cold. "There's a tissue defect," he said quietly. "The inferior wall is thinner than the imaging showed. It might not hold." The OR fell silent. This was the moment that separated good surgeons from great ones, the ability to adapt when plans fell apart. Daniel closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, visualizing the problem. Then he saw it, a solution so audacious it would either be brilliant or catastrophic. "We're going to buttress it with pericardium," he said. "Create a living patch that will grow with her." "That's not part of the protocol," Angela said carefully. "The protocol just changed. Karen, can the graft handle the additional attachment points?" Karen ran rapid calculations in her head. "Theoretically, yes, but no buts. We do this or she dies. Tom, I need another 10 minutes of bypass time." "You've got it." Daniel worked with renewed intensity, harvesting tissue from Grace's own pericardium and creating a living support structure for the synthetic graft. It was surgery at its most creative, part planning and part improvisation. Finally, after 4 hours and 37 minutes, the last suture was placed. "Coming off bypass," Tom announced. "Let's see if it works." This was the moment of truth. Either blood would flow through the new pathways or it wouldn't. Either Grace's half-heart would function with its synthetic addition or it wouldn't. The heart-lung machine slowly reduced its support, forcing Grace's heart to take over. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then, like sunrise after the longest night, Grace's heart began to beat. Blood flowed through the graft exactly as designed, the helical pattern reducing turbulence just as she had predicted. "Flows are good," Tom reported, his usually flat voice carrying a note of excitement. "Pressures are, my God, they're normal, completely normal." The OR erupted in subdued celebration. They still had to close, still had to monitor for immediate complications, but the impossible had become possible. Daniel looked up at the observation deck. Charlotte had collapsed in her chair, sobbing with relief. Lila was jumping up and down, her oxygen tubes bouncing with her movement. "We did it," Karen said, disbelief in her voice. "We actually did it." "Grace did it," Daniel corrected. "She designed the solution. We just implemented it." The closing took another hour, each layer meticulously repaired. By the time Daniel stepped back from the table, Grace's chest rose and fell with steady, unassisted breaths. For the first time in her 11 years of life, her lips were pink instead of blue. In the recovery room, Charlotte grabbed Daniel in a fierce hug, sobbing into his shoulder. "You saved her! You saved my baby!" "She saved herself," Daniel said. "She never gave up. Neither did you. What happens now?" "Now we wait. The next 48 hours are critical." "But Charlotte," he pulled back to look at her. "Her pressures are perfect. Her oxygenation is at 98%. I've never seen numbers this good in an HLHS patient." Grace woke 3 hours later, Lila and Charlotte at her bedside. Her first word was, "Mathematics." Everyone laughed through their tears. "The flow dynamics," Grace continued groggily. "Did the helical pattern work?" "Perfectly," Daniel assured her. "You were right about everything." "Good. Can I see the data?" Even fresh from surgery, barely conscious, Grace's mind sought understanding. She walked the halls with Lila, the two girls planning futures that suddenly seemed possible. Preston Vale made one last attempt at sabotage, filing a complaint with the medical board about the unauthorized modification to the surgical protocol. But Charlotte's lawyers were ready, armed with documentation showing that surgical innovation was not only legal, but necessary when lives hung in the balance. The complaint was dismissed, and Preston found himself under investigation for filing false reports and attempted interference with medical care. A week after surgery, Grace was discharged. She stood at the hospital entrance, breathing deeply of the November air. No oxygen support needed for the first time she could remember. "How does it feel?" Lila asked. "Like flying," Grace said. "Like I've been underwater my whole life and just surfaced." Daniel watched them, his own daughter still tethered to her oxygen but standing straighter, hope visible in her eyes. Charlotte stood beside him, their shoulders touching. "What you did?" Charlotte said quietly. "It's going to change everything. Every child with HLHS now has hope." "We need to publish the results, train other surgeons. This can't be a one-time miracle." "I'll fund it. The Mercer Cross Institute for Pediatric Cardiac Innovation. We'll teach the procedure to every qualified surgeon who wants to learn. Daniel looked at her in surprise. That's incredibly generous. It's necessary. No parent should have to watch their child fade when solutions exist. She paused. Speaking of which, Lila's condition. Have you considered that the same principles might apply? Daniel had been thinking exactly that. The helical flow dynamics, the synthetic supplementation, it could potentially address Lila's cardiomyopathy as well. It would need modification, but yes, I've been working on the calculations. Then we'll do it. Same team, same commitment. We'll save them both. As if sensing the conversation about her, Lila looked back and waved. Grace whispered something in her ear and both girls laughed, the sound bright and alive and full of promise. You know, Charlotte said, Preston actually did us a favor. How's that? If he hadn't tripped you, if that wine hadn't spilled, none of this would have happened. Grace would be dying and we never would have known that Salvation was serving champagne at our gala. Daniel thought about the strange paths that led to miracles, a spilled bottle of wine, a desperate mother, a brilliant child, and a surgeon who'd lost his way only to find it again in the most unexpected place. Sarah would have called it fate, he said. What do you call it? Daniel watched their daughters planning adventures, making promises about puzzles and equations, and all the tomorrows stretching ahead of them. I call it grace, he said, in every sense of the word. The late afternoon sun painted the hospital entrance in shades of gold, and for the first time in 3 years, Daniel felt the weight of Sarah's death lift slightly from his shoulders. He hadn't been able to save his wife, but he'd saved Grace. And maybe, in saving her, he'd saved himself too. His phone buzzed with a text from Karen. CNN wants to do a story. Medical journals are calling. The whole world wants to know about the surgery. Daniel showed it to Charlotte, who smiled. Ready to be famous again? I was never famous, just good at what I did. You still are. Better, even. Loss either breaks us or refines us. You've been refined into something extraordinary. We all have, Daniel said, thinking of Grace's courage, Charlotte's determination, Lila's unwavering faith. As they prepared to leave, Grace turned back one more time to look at the hospital that had been her second home for so many years. I'm going to come back here, she announced, as a doctor. I'm going to save other kids like me. I believe you will, Daniel said. Will you teach me? When I'm older? It would be my honor. They walked toward Charlotte's waiting car, two families forged by crisis into something stronger. The Yamamoto cross procedure would go on to save thousands of children worldwide, but for Daniel, it would always be about this moment. Watching Grace Mercer walk freely under her own power, breathing easily, her brilliant mind already reaching toward a future that had seemed impossible just weeks before. The car ride from the hospital was quiet, each passenger lost in their own thoughts about what had just transpired. Grace sat between Lila and Charlotte in the back seat, her hand resting on her chest where she could feel her heart beating with a strength it had never possessed before. The synthetic graft was doing its work, creating pathways for blood that her body had never been able to provide on its own. Dad, Lila said softly, breaking the silence, when you fix my heart, will it hurt like Grace's surgery? Daniel met his daughter's eyes in the rearview mirror. We'll make sure you're as comfortable as possible, baby. But yes, there will be some pain. Recovery is never easy. I'll be there, Grace said immediately, squeezing Lila's hand. I'll teach you all the tricks I learned, like how to make the nurses laugh so they give you extra jello, and how to adjust the bed just right so it doesn't hurt as much to breathe. Charlotte's phone buzzed insistently, but she ignored it, her attention focused on the two girls who had become inseparable over the past week. It buzzed again, until finally she answered with barely concealed irritation. What is it, Marcus? Daniel could hear the urgent voice on the other end, though not the specific words. Charlotte's expression shifted from annoyance to alarm. When? How many reporters? No, don't let them into the building. I'm sending security now. She ended the call and immediately dialed another number. James? We have a situation. Media circus at the lab. Someone leaked the surgery details. Preston? Daniel said, not a question but a statement. Most likely. He's trying to control the narrative, probably spinning it as unauthorized human experimentation or something equally inflammatory. Charlotte's fingers flew across her phone screen, sending messages to her legal and PR teams. We need to get ahead of this. They arrived at Charlotte's penthouse apartment instead of the lab, security having advised them to avoid the media gathering. The space was magnificent, but felt lived in, with Grace's mathematics books scattered across the coffee table and medical equipment discreetly positioned throughout. Make yourselves comfortable, Charlotte said, gesturing to the living room. I need to handle this. While Charlotte worked her phone, coordinating the response to the media storm, Daniel found himself studying Grace's notebook, left open on the table. Her handwriting was precise, documenting not just the mathematics of her condition, but her observations about the experience of being sick, of being different, of facing mortality at an age when most children worried about homework and friendships. She writes about you, Lila said, reading over his shoulder. Look, right there. Dr. Cross doesn't just see my heart. He sees me. That's rarer than any surgical skill. Daniel's throat tightened. In the margin, Grace had written something else. If I survive, I want to be like him. If I don't, I want to have tried like him. She's going to survive, Lila said firmly. She already did the hard part. The hard part isn't over, Daniel corrected gently. Recovery is its own challenge, and there's always the risk of rejection, infection, complications we can't foresee. But you'll handle them. You handled everything else. Before Daniel could respond, Charlotte returned, her expression grim. It's worse than I thought. Preston didn't just leak to the media. He's filed an injunction trying to prevent us from performing the procedure on any other patients, including Lila. He's claiming we violated FDA protocols. Did we? Grace asked, having been quietly listening. Technically, no, Charlotte said. The FDA allows for innovative procedures in life-threatening situations where standard treatments have failed. But the legal battle could take months, maybe years. I don't have years, Lila said quietly. Neither do all the other kids who need this surgery. Daniel stood, pacing to the window. Manhattan stretched out below, millions of lives continuing obvious to the drama unfolding in this penthouse. We need to document everything, every decision, every modification to the protocol, every outcome. Create a case so airtight that no court could rule against us. Already in progress, Charlotte said. But Daniel, there's something else. Preston has connections at several hospitals. He's trying to get your surgical privileges revoked, claiming you're a danger to patients. The old Daniel, the one who had served champagne just over a week ago, might have crumbled at this news. But the Daniel who had just saved Grace Mercer's life felt only determination. Let him try. The surgery was recorded, every moment, every decision. Anyone who watches that footage will see innovation, not recklessness. Charlotte's phone rang again. This time her expression shifted to surprise. Dr. Morrison? Yes, he's here. She handed the phone to Daniel. It's the chief of surgery at Johns Hopkins. Daniel took the phone, his pulse quickening. Dr. Richard Morrison had been his mentor, the man who had taught him everything about pediatric cardiac surgery. They hadn't spoken since Sarah's death. Daniel, Morrison's gravelly voice was warm, almost paternal. I just watched the surgical footage Charlotte's team sent over. It's magnificent work. Maybe the best I've ever seen. Dr. Morrison, Listen to me, son. What happened with Sarah wasn't your fault. We all knew it. The board knew it. But grief makes us do terrible things, and her family had influence. I should have fought harder for you. I've regretted it every day since. Daniel sank into a chair, the weight of 3 years of exile, suddenly overwhelming. It doesn't matter now. Yes, it does, because I'm offering you your job back, full professorship, your own surgical suite, and resources to develop the Yamamoto cross procedure into a standard protocol. We want you home, Daniel. Home. Johns Hopkins had been home once, before everything fell apart. The offer was everything he'd dreamed of during his darkest moments. I need to think about it, Daniel said. Of course. But Daniel, don't let Preston Vale influence your decision. He's been removed from our board, effective immediately. What you did for the Mercer girl proved what we always knew. You're one of the best surgeons of your generation. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. After ending the call, Daniel found Charlotte watching him with an unreadable expression. Johns Hopkins wants you back, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. That's wonderful. It's vindication, restoration, everything you deserve. But something in her voice suggested it was anything but wonderful to her. Before Daniel could respond, Grace spoke up from where she sat with Lila. If you go to Baltimore, who will do Lila's surgery? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Daniel looked at his daughter, who was trying very hard to appear brave, but couldn't quite hide the fear in her eyes. I would never leave before Lila's surgery, he said firmly. Never. But after? Lila asked in a small voice. Daniel crossed to his daughter, kneeling before her. We'll figure it out together. We always do. Charlotte's phone buzzed with another message. She read it, and her expression darkened further. The FDA wants a hearing, tomorrow. They want to evaluate the procedure before allowing it to be performed again. Tomorrow? Daniel stood, incredulous. Grace is barely 24 hours post-op. She can't travel to Washington. They're coming here. And Daniel, they're bringing Preston's experts to testify against the procedure. The next morning arrived with the kind of bitter cold that made November in New York feel like January anywhere else. The FDA hearing was scheduled for 2 o'clock at Galaxy Corporation's headquarters. The conference room transformed into a makeshift courtroom. Daniel spent the morning with Grace, monitoring her recovery and marveling at her progress. Her cardiac output remained strong, the graft functioning flawlessly. She was sitting up in bed, working through a university-level topology textbook when he arrived. Nervous about the hearing? She asked. Terrified, Daniel admitted. Good. Remember what Lila says. Being brave means being scared and doing it anyway. Grace set aside her book. Dr. Cross, what you did for me wasn't just surgery. You gave me time. Time to grow up, to learn, to maybe fall in love someday. That's worth fighting for, isn't it? Every second of it. Then fight. Don't let them turn something beautiful into something bureaucratic. The hearing convened in a boardroom that could have housed a small airplane. The FDA panel consisted of 5 officials, their expressions professionally neutral. Preston Vale sat with his team of experts, his smile sharp as a scalpel. Charlotte was there with her lawyers, looking every inch the CEO ready for battle. Karen Yamamoto, Tom Bradley, and Angela Cruz had all flown in to support Daniel's testimony. Lila and Grace watched from a connected room via video link, Grace still in her hospital bed but insisting on being present. The FDA panel chair, Dr. Elizabeth Warren, called the hearing to order. We're here to evaluate the safety and efficacy of the synthetic graft procedure performed on Grace Mercer, and to determine whether this procedure should be permitted for other patients. Preston's lead expert, Dr. Harold Steinberg, went first. Daniel recognized him, a competent but conservative surgeon who had never attempted anything that wasn't already in a textbook. The procedure Dr. Cross performed was reckless, Steinberg began. Untested materials, unproven techniques, modifications made during surgery without proper authorization. This wasn't medicine, it was experimentation on a child. A child who is alive because of that experimentation, Charlotte interjected. Ms. Mercer, you'll have your opportunity to speak, Dr. Warren said. Please continue, Dr. Steinberg. Steinberg presented his case methodically, highlighting every deviation from standard protocol, every decision that could have gone wrong. He made the surgery sound like a series of lucky gambles rather than calculated innovations. When Daniel's turn came, he stood slowly, carrying a tablet loaded with data. Dr. Steinberg is correct that we deviated from standard protocol. We had to. Standard protocol had failed Grace Mercer. Every conventional approach had been tried. She was dying. He pulled up Grace's preoperative scans. This was her heart before surgery. Multiple surgeons, including Dr. Steinberg, declared it inoperable. Now look at this. He switched to the postoperative images. Perfect flow, normal pressures, complete oxygenation. This isn't luck, it's innovation. Innovation that could have killed her, Preston said from his seat. Doing nothing would have killed her with certainty, Daniel shot back. We gave her a chance. For the next 2 hours, Daniel presented every aspect of the procedure, every calculation, every decision point. Karen testified about the graft materials. Tom about the bypass management, Angela about the anesthetic considerations. Each testimony built on the last, creating a comprehensive picture of a medical team working at the absolute peak of their abilities. Then Grace asked to speak. "I'm 11 years old," she began, her voice clear through the video link. "I've been dying my whole life, not dramatically, not obviously, but slowly. Every birthday, my parents wondered if it would be my last. Every Christmas was potentially the final one. Dr. Cross changed that, not just by fixing my heart, but by seeing me as more than a medical problem to be managed. He saw me as a person worth saving." She paused, touching her chest where the incisions were still healing. "You're debating whether this procedure should be allowed, but you're really debating whether children like me deserve a chance at life. The answer seems obvious to me." Lila spoke next, her small voice carrying surprising strength. "My dad hasn't done surgery in 3 years because his wife died. He blamed himself even though it wasn't his fault. But when he saw Grace needed help, he didn't hesitate. He knew he might fail again, might lose another patient, but he tried anyway. That's not reckless. That's heroic." Dr. Warren consulted quietly with the other panel members. Preston looked increasingly agitated, whispering urgently to his lawyers. "Mr. Vale," Dr. Warren said suddenly, "I understand you have a financial interest in several companies that manufacture drugs for palliative cardiac care. Is that correct?" Preston's face flushed. "That has nothing to do with—" "It has everything to do with your objections," Dr. Warren continued. "If this procedure becomes standard, the market for those drugs decreases significantly. Your opposition isn't medical, it's financial." "That's slander." "It's fact," Charlotte said, producing a thick folder. "I have here documentation of Mr. Vale's investments, his communications with pharmaceutical companies about the potential impact of the Yamamoto Cross procedure, and his attempts to suppress research that might reduce drug dependence in cardiac patients." The room erupted. Preston's lawyers objected loudly, while Charlotte's team responded with equal force. Through it all, Daniel watched the FDA panel, trying to read their expressions. Finally, Dr. Warren called for order. "We'll recess for 30 minutes to deliberate." Those 30 minutes felt like hours. Daniel sat with his team, none of them speaking, all of them knowing that the future of pediatric cardiac surgery hung in the balance. When the panel returned, Dr. Warren's expression was unreadable. "After reviewing all testimony and evidence, we've reached a decision. The synthetic graft procedure, while unconventional, represents a significant advancement in pediatric cardiac surgery. The modifications made during surgery were appropriate responses to unexpected findings and demonstrate the kind of adaptive thinking medicine needs." Relief flooded through Daniel, but Dr. Warren wasn't finished. "However, we require that the procedure be performed only at certified centers with appropriate resources and expertise. Dr. Cross, we're authorizing you to establish a training program for qualified surgeons. Ms. Mercer, if you're willing to fund this program, the FDA will fast-track approval for additional cases." "More than willing," Charlotte said immediately. Preston stood abruptly, his face twisted with fury. "This is a mistake. When children die from this experimental procedure, the only mistake," Dr. Warren interrupted, "was allowing financial interest to influence medical decisions. Mr. Vale, I recommend you leave before we discuss referring your interference to the Justice Department for investigation." Preston stormed out, his team trailing behind him. As the door slammed, Grace's voice came through the video link. "Does this mean Lila can have her surgery?" "Yes," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, it does." The room erupted in celebration. Karen hugged Daniel fiercely. Tom actually smiled, and Angela wiped away tears she would later deny. Charlotte stood apart for a moment, watching the celebration, then approached Daniel. "Baltimore?" she asked quietly. "Can wait," Daniel said. "We have work to do here first." "And after?" Daniel looked at the video screen where Grace and Lila were celebrating together, two girls whose hearts were broken in different ways, but whose spirits were unbreakable. "After, we'll see. The Mercer Cross Institute needs leadership, the training program needs development, Lila needs stability. And," he paused, meeting Charlotte's eyes, "I think I've found something here worth staying for." Charlotte's smile was radiant. "The Institute does need leadership, both medical and administrative. Partners? Partners, Daniel agreed, and this time the word carried more weight than just professional collaboration. The next weeks were a whirlwind of preparation for Lila's surgery. Unlike Grace's emergency procedure, they had time to plan every detail. The graft was crafted with even greater precision, incorporating lessons learned from Grace's surgery. Lila spent her days with Grace, the older girl teaching her breathing exercises and coping strategies. The worst part isn't the pain, Grace explained one afternoon as they worked on a puzzle together. It's the waiting. Waiting to feel better, waiting to breathe normally, waiting to know if it worked. But it did work for you, Lila pointed out, because your dad is magic, and because I believed it would work. You have to believe too, Lila. The heart is more than just a pump. It responds to hope. Daniel overheard this conversation from the doorway, struck by the wisdom of these children who had faced more than most adults could imagine. Charlotte appeared beside him, having arrived to check on both girls. "They're remarkable," she said softly. "They've had to be. So have we." She paused. "Daniel, I need to tell you something. Preston isn't giving up. He's been contacting medical boards in other states trying to prevent the procedure from spreading. Let him try. Every success makes his position weaker. There's more. He's been investigating you, your life after Sarah's death, your time as a waiter. He's looking for anything to discredit you." Daniel tensed. "There's nothing to find. I lived quietly, raised my daughter, survived." "I know, but he's desperate. Desperate people do dangerous things." As if to underscore her point, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of Lila at the park with her babysitter, taken from a distance. The message read, "She looks fragile. Accidents happen." Charlotte saw his expression change, saw the shift from doctor to father, from calm to furious. "He's threatening Lila," Daniel said, his voice deadly quiet. Charlotte was already on her phone. "Security team to my apartment now, and get the police." She looked at Daniel. "He just crossed a line he can't come back from." Within hours, Preston Vale was arrested for harassment and making threats against a minor. The photo had been traced to a private investigator he'd hired, who quickly cooperated with police in exchange for immunity. Preston's empire began to crumble as investigations revealed years of financial manipulation and medical interference. But Daniel barely noticed Preston's downfall. His focus was entirely on Lila, who remained blissfully unaware of the threat, concentrating instead on her upcoming surgery. The night before the procedure, Daniel sat with Lila in her hospital room. Grace was there too, having insisted on staying despite having been discharged days earlier. "Dad, are you scared?" Lila asked. "Terrified." "But you're still going to do it?" "Of course. Because that's what brave means." "No," Daniel said, pulling her close. "Because that's what love means. Doing whatever it takes to give you a chance at a full life." "Mom would be proud of you," Lila whispered. "She'd be proud of you too, baby. So proud." Grace reached over and took Lila's hand. "Tomorrow, when you wake up, you'll be like me. Fixed. Not perfect, but better. And we'll grow up together, go to college together, maybe even become doctors together." "Promise?" Lila asked. "Promise." Charlotte watched from the doorway, tears streaming down her face. When Daniel noticed her, she didn't try to hide them. "They're going to be okay," she said, "both of them." "How do you know?" "Because they have each other, and they have us." She moved into the room, completing the unlikely family they'd become. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Daniel, you've already given her everything. Hope, love, a chance. That's all any parent can do." That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He reviewed the surgical plan one final time, visualized every step, every potential complication. But mostly, he thought about Sarah, about how she would have loved seeing him return to surgery, seeing him save not just Grace, but their own daughter. "Guide my hands," he whispered to the darkness. "One more time, help me save her." The morning arrived gray and cold, snow beginning to fall as they prepared Lila for surgery. She was brave until the moment they had to separate, then clung to Daniel with all her small strength. "You'll be here when I wake up." "I'll be the first thing you see," Daniel promised. "And Grace." "I'll be right here too," Grace said from her wheelchair, still recovering but insisting on being present. "Right here waiting for you." As they wheeled Lila into the OR, she looked back one more time. Dad, after this, can we stop being scared all the time? Yes, baby. After this, we can just be happy. The OR team was the same as before, but this time there was an additional audience. Surgeons from around the world were watching via video link, learning the procedure that would save thousands of children. Daniel was aware of them, but focused only on the small form on the table, his daughter, his reason for continuing after losing everything. Time out, Angela began. Patient is Lila Cross, medical record number 559371. Procedure is synthetic graft placement for dilated cardiomyopathy via modified Yamamoto cross technique. Confirmed, the team responded. Daniel looked up one more time at the observation deck where Charlotte and Grace watched. Grace gave him a thumbs up. Charlotte mouthed, "You've got this." "Scalpel," Daniel said, and began the surgery that would either save his daughter or destroy what remained of his world. The procedure went flawlessly for the first 2 hours. Lila's heart, while damaged, was structurally simpler than Grace's had been. The graft placement was proceeding exactly as planned. Then Tom noticed something on the monitors. "Pressure spike in the pulmonary artery," he reported. "It's climbing fast." Daniel looked at the surgical field, immediately identifying the problem. "There's a clot. It must have formed during bypass." He had seconds to decide. Remove the clot risked devastating bleeding, but leaving it meant certain failure. "I need microsuction now." Karen moved with him in perfect synchronization, anticipating his needs as he worked to remove the clot without damaging the delicate vessels. It was surgery at its most demanding, requiring absolute precision and complete trust between team members. "Got it," Daniel said as the clot came free. "Pressure?" "Normalizing," Tom reported. "Nice save." The rest of the surgery proceeded without incident. When the final suture was placed and Lila's heart began beating with new strength, Daniel felt Sarah's presence so strongly it was as if she were standing beside him. "We did it," he whispered. "We saved her." Lila woke 3 hours later to find Daniel exactly where he'd promised to be. Her first word was, "Grace?" "Right here," Grace said from her chair beside the bed. "Welcome to the Fixed Heart Club. It's very exclusive." "Does it hurt?" "Yes. But it's the good kind of hurt, the kind that means you're healing." Over the following days, Lila's recovery paralleled Grace's remarkable progress. The two girls supported each other through the difficult moments, creating a bond that transcended friendship. They were survivors, warriors, sisters in everything but blood. Charlotte used the time to establish the Mercer Cross Institute, with Daniel as medical director and herself as executive director. The first training session was scheduled for the following month, with 12 pediatric cardiac surgeons from around the world coming to learn the procedure. "We're going to change everything," Charlotte said one evening as they watched the girls work on homework together, both of them breathing easily, their color perfect. "Every child with these conditions now has hope." "We already changed everything," Daniel corrected. "Look at them." Grace was explaining a mathematical concept to Lila, her hands moving animatedly as she spoke. Lila was laughing at something Grace had said, the sound bright and clear without the wheeze that had accompanied it for so long. "Daniel," Charlotte said suddenly. "Johns Hopkins called again. They need an answer." He'd been expecting this conversation. The offer from Hopkins was everything he'd wanted 3 years ago: vindication, restoration, a return to his old life. But that life didn't exist anymore. The man who had operated at Hopkins, who had lost his wife there, was gone. In his place was someone new, someone who had learned that sometimes the greatest gifts came disguised as disasters. "I'm staying," he said simply. "This is home now. The Institute, the girls, you. This is where I belong." Charlotte's relief was visible. "Good. Because I have a confession. I may have already told Hopkins you weren't coming." "Charlotte, I know you, Daniel Cross. You're many things, but you're not someone who walks away from unfinished business. And we have so much unfinished business." "Medical business, you mean?" "Among other things." She met his eyes meaningfully. "Grace asked me something yesterday. She wanted to know if you and Lila might want to move in with us. The penthouse is too big for just 2 people, and the girls want to be together." "That's a big step." "We've already taken bigger ones. We rebuilt hearts, Daniel. Moving in together seems simple by comparison. Daniel thought about it, about the family they'd accidentally created through crisis and courage, about Grace and Lila, who needed each other as much as their repaired hearts needed to beat, about Charlotte, who had stood by him through the hardest surgery of his life and never wavered. The girls would love it, he said carefully. What about you? I think, Daniel said slowly, that Sarah would want me to be happy. She'd want Lila to have a family, and she'd probably laugh at how complicated the path was to get here. Is that a yes? That's a yes. Charlotte smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked truly at peace. Good, because I already had your things moved. Charlotte! I'm a CEO. I'm used to making executive decisions. They were interrupted by laughter from the girls' room. Grace had discovered that Lila had been sneaking chocolate despite dietary restrictions, and Lila was defending herself with elaborate mathematical proofs about why chocolate was actually medicinal. They're going to be terrifying when they grow up, Charlotte observed. They already are, Daniel said, but in the best possible way. That night, after the girls were asleep, Daniel stood on Charlotte's balcony, looking out at the city lights. The same lights he'd shown Lila from the Galaxy Corporation building the night everything changed. So much had happened in such a short time. Redemption, love, hope, and two hearts made whole through impossible surgery. His phone buzzed with a message from Karen Yamamoto. First batch of surgeons arriving next week. Are you ready to teach the world what you've learned? Daniel typed back. Ready. Charlotte appeared beside him, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders. Regrets? She asked. None. You? Only that it took a spilled bottle of wine to bring us together. Preston Vale accidentally saved 3 lives that night, Daniel mused. Grace's, Lila's, and mine. 4, Charlotte corrected. He saved mine too. I was drowning in despair before you gave me hope. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching snow begin to fall over Manhattan. Inside, their daughters slept peacefully, hearts beating strong and steady, futures stretching before them bright with possibility. You know what Grace asked me today? Charlotte said. She wanted to know if hearts could grow back stronger after being broken. What did you tell her? I told her to ask you. You're the heart expert. Daniel considered the question, thinking of all the broken hearts he'd encountered. His own after Sarah's death, Charlotte's as she watched Grace fade, the literal broken hearts he'd repaired with synthetic grafts and surgical skill. Yes, he said finally. Hearts can grow back stronger, but only if you're brave enough to let them heal and wise enough to accept help when it's offered. Like accepting a job from a wine-soaked CEO. Like trusting a disgraced surgeon with your daughter's life. Like 2 single parents finding each other in the most unlikely circumstances. Like 2 broken families becoming whole. Charlotte turned to face him fully. Daniel, I need to tell you something. That night at the gala, I knew who you were the moment you said your name. I'd researched you months earlier when I was desperate for options for Grace. I knew about Sarah, about your theory, about everything. Daniel stared at her. You knew? Then why the surprise when... Because I never imagined you'd be there, serving drinks at our gala. It seemed like fate or divine intervention or just the universe's twisted sense of humor. But when you spilled that wine, when I saw the recognition in your eyes as you diagnosed Grace's condition just from observation, I knew. Knew what? That you were exactly who we needed. Not just a surgeon, but someone who understood loss and still chose hope. Someone who had been broken and rebuilt himself. Someone who could teach Grace that surviving isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about becoming stronger at the broken places. Daniel pulled Charlotte closer, the weight of her revelation settling between them like a shared secret. You took an incredible risk trusting someone you'd only researched on paper. Every parent of a dying child becomes an expert at calculating impossible risks, Charlotte replied. Besides, I didn't just research your medical career. I found the nurses who worked with you, the families whose children you saved. They all said the same thing, that you saw the whole child, not just the broken parts. The snow was falling heavier now, blanketing the city in pristine white that would turn gray by morning. Through the glass doors, they could see the girls' rooms, nightlights casting soft glows that reminded them both of hospital corridors they'd walked too many times. Tomorrow, the first reporters arrive, Charlotte said. They want to document the training program, follow the next surgeries. Are you ready to be in the spotlight again? As long as it helps other children, yes. But Charlotte, there's something we need to discuss. Preston's arrest. It won't be the end. Men like him have connections, resources. He'll find a way to retaliate. I'm counting on it, Charlotte said with a smile that would have been at home on a shark. My lawyers have been building a case against him for years. Securities fraud, insider trading, medical interference. His arrest for threatening Lila was just the beginning. By the time we're done, Preston Vale won't be able to get a job selling medical supplies to veterinarians. Before Daniel could respond, they heard a cry from inside. Both parents rushed in to find Lila sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face, her breathing rapid but notably stronger than it would have been before the surgery. Nightmare? Daniel asked, sitting beside her and pulling her into his arms. I dreamed the surgery didn't work, Lila sobbed. That I woke up and nothing had changed. Grace appeared in the doorway, moving carefully but steadily. Without a word, she climbed into bed beside Lila, wrapping her arms around the younger girl. Feel my heart, Grace said, taking Lila's hand and placing it on her chest. What do you feel? It's strong, Lila whispered. Now feel yours. Lila placed her hand on her own chest, wonder spreading across her face. It's the same. Strong like yours. That's because we match now. We're heart sisters, and heart sisters don't leave each other alone with nightmares. Charlotte and Daniel exchanged glances over the girls' heads. The bond between their daughters had become something beyond friendship, beyond even sisterhood. They had walked through the valley of the shadow together and emerged holding hands. How about some hot chocolate? Charlotte suggested. Special circumstances call for breaking the dietary rules. As they gathered in the kitchen, Daniel's phone buzzed with an email from Dr. Morrison at Johns Hopkins. He almost deleted it unopened, but the subject line caught his attention. You need to see this. The email contained a link to a medical journal article that had just been published. The title made Daniel's blood run cold. Questioning the Cross Method, a critical analysis of unproven pediatric cardiac interventions by Dr. Harold Steinberg and 15 co-authors. What is it? Charlotte asked, noticing his expression. Daniel showed her the screen. Preston's last move. He got Steinberg and others to publish a hit piece on the procedure. If this gains traction, it could shut down the training program before it starts. Charlotte was already reading, her expression growing darker with each paragraph. This is medical malpractice masquerading as peer review. They're cherry-picking data, misrepresenting the outcomes. Daniel, they're claiming Grace and Lila's recoveries are temporary, that the grafts will fail within months. Let me see, Grace said, reaching for the phone. She read quickly, her analytical mind processing the arguments. They're wrong about the flow dynamics. Look, they're using standard fluid equations without accounting for the helical pattern. It's like calculating airplane lift without considering wing shape. You can't fight a published journal article with math from an 11-year-old, Daniel said, though he knew Grace was right. No, Charlotte said slowly, but we can fight it with data. Real-time, irrefutable data. She looked at both girls. How would you feel about being the subjects of the most thoroughly documented medical case studies in history? Every heartbeat, every pressure reading, every improvement cataloged and shared with the world. Will it help other kids? Lila asked. It'll save them, Daniel said. Then yes, both girls said simultaneously. Over the next week, Charlotte mobilized resources that most hospitals could only dream of. She brought in independent medical reviewers, statisticians, and even a documentary film crew to record everything. The girls underwent daily tests, their improved cardiac function meticulously documented. Meanwhile, Daniel worked with the arriving surgeons, teaching them not just the technical aspects of the procedure, but the philosophy behind it. Dr. Chen from Beijing, Dr. Williams from London, Dr. Santos from Sao Paulo, each brought their own expertise while learning the revolutionary technique. The graft isn't just a physical bridge, Daniel explained during one training session, Grace and Lila watching from the observation deck. It's a promise to the heart that it can function differently, better. You have to believe in that promise, or the heart won't. That sounds almost mystical, Dr. Williams commented. Medicine is equal parts science and faith, Daniel replied. We just don't like admitting the second part. 3 weeks into the training program, the real test came. A 4-year-old boy from Phoenix arrived, his heart failing despite 3 previous surgeries. His parents had seen news coverage of Grace's recovery and flew to New York against their local doctor's advice. "His name is Marcus," the mother said, clutching her son's hand. "The doctors in Phoenix said we should start planning his funeral. But I saw that girl on TV, the one who was dying and now isn't. Please, Dr. Cross, please try." Daniel examined Marcus carefully. The boy's condition was even worse than Grace's had been, his lips a deep blue, his breathing labored even at rest. But in his eyes, Daniel saw the same fierce determination to live that he'd seen in Grace and Lila. "We'll need to modify the procedure further," he told his team. "His anatomy requires a dual graft system, one for each side of the heart." "That's never been attempted," Dr. Chen pointed out. "Most of what we're doing has never been attempted," Daniel replied. "That's what makes it revolutionary." Grace asked to meet Marcus before his surgery. Charlotte wheeled her to his room, where the little boy lay surrounded by the familiar forest of medical equipment. "Hi, Marcus," Grace said softly. "I'm Grace. I had the surgery you're going to have." Marcus studied her with the directness of a young child. "Did it hurt?" "Yes, but now I can run and play and breathe without machines." She leaned closer conspiratorially. "And the jello here is actually pretty good." "I like jello," Marcus whispered. "Then you'll do great. Dr. Cross fixed my broken heart, and he'll fix yours too. You just have to be brave." "How?" Grace thought for a moment. "My friend Lila says being brave means being scared but doing it anyway, so it's okay to be scared. Are you scared now?" "No, now I'm just happy. And soon you will be too." The surgery on Marcus took 7 hours, with Daniel leading while the visiting surgeons observed and assisted. The dual graft system was unprecedented in its complexity, requiring precise coordination between 2 synthetic components that had to work in perfect harmony. Halfway through, they encountered a crisis. Marcus's blood pressure dropped precipitously, his small body struggling with the extended bypass time. "We need to abort," Dr. Steinberg would have said if he'd been there. But Daniel had learned something from Grace and Lila, that sometimes the difference between failure and success was simply refusing to give up. "Tom, can you give me 10 more minutes?" "I can give you 5, Tom replied, adjusting the bypass machine with expert precision. "Then 5 it is." Daniel worked with speed that bordered on superhuman, his hands completing sutures that normally took 15 minutes in less than 4. The visiting surgeons watched in awe as he demonstrated why he'd once been considered the best pediatric cardiac surgeon in the country. With 30 seconds to spare, the final connection was made. "Coming off bypass," Tom announced. The room held its breath. Marcus's heart, now supplemented by 2 synthetic grafts, had to coordinate a complex dance of blood flow that had never been attempted before. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. Then, like an orchestra finding its rhythm, Marcus's heart began to beat with strong, coordinated contractions. The oxygen saturation readings climbed steadily, 70%, 80%, 90%, 95%. "My God," Dr. Santos breathed. "It's working." In the observation room, Charlotte grabbed Daniel's spare surgical cap, the one he'd left there that morning, and clutched it like a talisman. Beside her, Grace and Lila held hands, their own repaired hearts beating in sympathy with Marcus's. "He did it," Lila whispered. "Dad did it again." When Daniel emerged from surgery 6 hours later, exhausted but triumphant, he found Charlotte waiting with news that made him sink into a chair. "Steinberg's article has been picked up by major media outlets. They're calling for an investigation, claiming we're experimenting on children." She showed him her tablet, headline after headline, questioning the ethics of the procedure. "They're trying to destroy this before it can spread," Daniel said wearily. "Then we fight back with success stories," Charlotte said. "Marcus makes 3 children saved. Grace and Lila are thriving. We have data, we have evidence, we have truth. Sometimes truth isn't enough against fear and money. Then we make it enough." Charlotte's determination was fierce. "I've scheduled a press conference for tomorrow. You, me, and the girls, if they're willing. We tell our story, all of it. The whine, the desperation, the miracle. We make them see these aren't just medical procedures, they're children's lives." That night, Daniel found himself unable to sleep despite his exhaustion. He wandered to the hospital's chapel, a small, quiet space he'd visited often during his years at Hopkins. To his surprise, he found someone already there, Marcus's mother, on her knees, sobbing with relief and exhaustion. "He's okay," she said when she saw Daniel. "My baby is okay. His lips are pink. I've never seen them pink before." Daniel sat beside her, understanding the weight of parental fear finally lifting. "He's more than okay. He's extraordinary. The way his heart adapted to the grafts, it's like it was waiting for them. The nurses said you haven't left the hospital in 3 days, that you've been sleeping in the on-call room to be close to all 3 children." "They needed monitoring," Daniel said simply. "No, they needed you. We all did." She turned to face him fully. "Dr. Steinberg called us before we came here. He said you were dangerous, that you'd killed your wife through incompetence. He tried to scare us away. Why didn't he succeed?" "Because I also talked to Grace's mother. She told me the real story. About the wine, about how you recognized her daughter's condition from across a room, about how you gave up everything to save a stranger's child. That's not incompetence, Dr. Cross. That's love in action." The press conference the next day was held in Galaxy Corporation's main auditorium, packed with reporters from around the world. Daniel stood at the podium in his white coat, Charlotte beside him in her CEO armor, both girls in wheelchairs behind them. Not because they needed them anymore, but to remind everyone how recently they'd been dying. "3 weeks ago," Daniel began, "I was a waiter at a charity gala. I'd been out of surgery for 3 years, hiding from my gift because I'd failed to save my wife. Then I spilled wine on Charlotte Mercer, and everything changed." He told the story simply, without embellishment. The recognition of Grace's condition, the impossible decision to attempt an untested procedure, the mathematics provided by an 11-year-old that made it possible. When he finished, the questions came fast and sharp. "Dr. Cross, how do you respond to critics who say you're playing God?" It was Grace who answered, wheeling herself forward to the microphone. "Playing God would be deciding who deserves to live and who doesn't, based on whether a procedure is in a textbook yet. Dr. Cross isn't playing God. He's doing what doctors are supposed to do. He's saving lives." "But the risks were mine to take," Grace interrupted. "I was dying. Every breath was harder than the last. Now look at me." She stood from her wheelchair, steady and strong. "This is what Dr. Cross's procedure did. This is what you're trying to stop from reaching other children." Lila joined her, also standing, also strong. "My dad lost my mom trying to save her. He could have never tried again, never risked that pain. But he did, for Grace and for me. That's not dangerous, that's heroic." Charlotte took the microphone next. "Galaxy Corporation is committing $50 million to establish Mercer Cross cardiac centers in 10 cities across the country. We're not asking for permission to save children's lives. We're doing it. Any hospital that wants to learn this procedure is welcome. Any child who needs it will receive it, regardless of ability to pay." "What about the FDA investigation?" another reporter called out. "What investigation?" Charlotte smiled. "I spoke with Director Warren this morning. The FDA is fast-tracking approval based on our outcomes. They're also investigating whether certain parties deliberately misrepresented data in recent medical journals to protect pharmaceutical profits." Daniel saw Preston Vale at the back of the room, his face purple with rage. Their eyes met across the crowd, and Daniel felt nothing but pity. Preston had chosen profit over lives, and now he was watching his empire crumble. The press conference shifted everything. Within hours, families from around the world were contacting the Institute. The visiting surgeons extended their stay to help manage the influx. Marcus was walking the halls, his parents crying every time they saw his pink cheeks. Grace and Lila had become inadvertent celebrities, their story of friendship through illness capturing hearts globally. A week later, Daniel was reviewing surgical footage with Dr. Chen when Charlotte burst in, her expression mixing triumph and exhaustion. "We won," she said simply. "The medical board just voted. The Yamamoto Cross procedure is now an approved standard of care for previously inoperable cardiac conditions. Insurance companies have to cover it." Daniel stared at her, unable to process the magnitude of what she was saying. In less than 2 months, they'd gone from a spilled bottle of wine to changing pediatric cardiac surgery forever. "We need to celebrate," Charlotte continued. "But first, there's someone you need to see." She led him to the pediatric ward where a familiar figure sat beside a young patient's bed. It was Dr. Morrison from Johns Hopkins, his hair grayer than Daniel remembered, but his eyes still sharp with intelligence. "Richard?" Daniel said, stunned. Morrison stood, extending his hand. "I came to see for myself what my former student had accomplished. Daniel, what you've done here, it's beyond anything we imagined possible. I had help. A brilliant 11-year-old mathematician, a CEO who wouldn't take no for an answer, and a daughter who reminded me what courage really means. I also came to apologize," Morrison continued, "for not fighting harder when you needed support, for letting politics override principle. It's in the past. No, it needs to be said. You were the best surgeon I ever trained, and we failed you when you needed us most. But what you've become without us, it's extraordinary. You didn't just return to surgery, you revolutionized it." Morrison turned to leave, then paused. "Hopkins wants to establish a Mercer Cross Center. We're hoping you'll consult, help train our surgeons. Not asking you to come back. You've clearly found where you belong. But your expertise should be shared." After Morrison left, Daniel found himself on the hospital roof, looking out over the city. Charlotte joined him, as he'd known she would. "Any regrets about not going back?" she asked. "None. That life, that version of me, it's gone. This is who I am now." "And who is that?" Daniel thought about it. A father, a surgeon, a teacher, a partner. He looked at her. "A man who learned that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things. The wine changed everything. Your persistence, your faith when I had none, that changed everything." Charlotte moved closer, their shoulders touching. "The girls want to know when we're getting married." Daniel nearly choked. "They what?" Grace did the math. She says the probability of optimal outcomes increases when resources are combined. Lila says it's simpler. We're already a family. We might as well make it official. "And what do you say?" Charlotte turned to face him fully. "I say that I fell in love with a man who served me wine while his hands shook with suppressed skill, who looked at my dying daughter and saw possibility, who gave up his own recovery to save her and then saved his own daughter too, who taught me that broken hearts, literal and metaphorical, can be rebuilt stronger." "Charlotte, I'm not proposing," she said quickly. "I'm just saying the girls aren't wrong. We are already a family. What we call it is just semantics." Before Daniel could respond, his phone rang. It was the surgical floor. Another patient had arrived, a 2-year-old from California whose parents had driven non-stop after seeing the press conference. "Go," Charlotte said. "Save another life. That's what you do." "What we do," Daniel corrected. "None of this happens without you." As he headed back to surgery, Daniel passed the room where Grace and Lila were teaching Marcus to play chess, their laughter bright and alive. 3 children who should have been planning funerals were instead planning futures. The surgery was complex but successful, the visiting surgeons now proficient enough to take lead roles while Daniel supervised. As he watched Dr. Santos execute a particularly difficult suture, Daniel realized that his legacy wouldn't be the lives he saved directly, but the knowledge he passed on, the surgeons he trained who would save thousands more. That evening, exhausted but exhilarated, Daniel found his entire makeshift family in Charlotte's penthouse. Grace and Lila had cooked dinner, or attempted to, resulting in something that looked questionable but tasted surprisingly good. Marcus and his parents were there too, the boy racing around with energy he'd never had before. "A toast," Charlotte said, raising her glass of sparkling cider in deference to the children, "to second chances, to impossible surgeries, to families formed by chance and choice. To Dad," Lila added, "who was brave enough to try again. To Charlotte," Grace said, "who never gave up. To all of us," Daniel said, "for believing in miracles." They clinked glasses, the sound crystalline and perfect. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside, warmth radiated from more than just the fireplace. It came from hearts, repaired and whole, biological and metaphorical, beating in harmony. Daniel's phone buzzed with another email from the medical journal that had published Steinberg's article. They were retracting it and publishing Daniel's data instead, with an editorial apologizing for the initial piece's inaccuracies. "Preston must be having an aneurysm," Charlotte said with satisfaction. Let him, Daniel replied. His opinion stopped mattering the moment we saved Grace. Later that evening, after the guests had left and the girls were asleep, Daniel found himself in Grace's room, watching her sleep. Her breathing was easy, unassisted, perfect. Charlotte appeared beside him, and together they stood in comfortable silence. She wants to be a surgeon, Charlotte said softly. Specifically, she wants to innovate like you did. She's already working on improvements to the graft design. She'll surpass anything I've done, Daniel said with certainty. She understands the mathematics in a way I never will. Lila wants to be a pediatric nurse. She says surgeons fix hearts, but nurses fix everything else. She's not wrong. They moved to Lila's room, where she slept curled around a stuffed bear Sarah had given her years ago. Her color was perfect, her breathing strong. Sarah would be so proud, Charlotte said gently. She would. She always believed I'd find my way back to surgery. I just never imagined it would be like this. Like what? Complete. Not just returning to who I was, but becoming who I was meant to be. Charlotte took his hand, intertwining their fingers. The girls were right, you know. About us. About marriage. Daniel looked at her, this remarkable woman who had crashed into his life with wine and desperation and transformed it into something beautiful. Charlotte Mercer, are you proposing to me? Someone has to. You're too cautious to do it yourself. Cautious? I performed experimental surgery on your daughter after knowing you for less than a week. That's medicine. This is life. You're much braver with scalpels than emotions. She was right, of course. Daniel had been so focused on fixing hearts that he'd barely noticed his own healing, growing stronger at the broken places, just as he'd told Charlotte hearts could do. Yes, he said simply. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, we should make this official. Yes to all of it. Charlotte's smile was radiant. The girls are going to be insufferable. They've been planning this for weeks. Of course they have. They were interrupted by a small voice from the doorway. Does this mean we're really going to be sisters? Lila stood there, Grace beside her, both of them trying to look innocent. How long have you been listening? Daniel asked. Long enough, Grace said with a grin. And yes, Lila, we're really going to be sisters. The girls launched themselves at their parents, creating a tangle of limbs and laughter. Daniel felt Sarah's presence again, not as loss, but as blessing. She had loved him enough to want him to find happiness again, to find love again, to find family again. We should have a heart-themed wedding, Grace suggested. Anatomically correct heart decorations, not the cartoon kind. Absolutely not, Charlotte laughed. We could serve red velvet cake, Lila added, because it looks like cardiac tissue. That's morbid, Daniel said, but he was smiling. We're heart warriors, Grace declared. Morbid is our brand. As they sat there planning a wedding that would undoubtedly be unique, Daniel's phone rang one more time. It was the night surgeon at the hospital. Dr. Cross, I'm sorry to call so late, but there's a situation. We have a newborn, just diagnosed with HLHS. The parents have heard about your work. They're asking, begging, for you to consider taking the case. Daniel looked at his family, for that's what they were now, officially or not. Charlotte nodded, understanding without words. The girls were already grabbing their coats, ready to accompany him to the hospital, as they often did now. We'll be right there, Daniel said. As they prepared to leave, Charlotte pulled him aside. You know this won't end, right? There will always be another child, another impossible case, another desperate parent. I know. And you're okay with that? With a life of impossible surgeries and desperate hopes? Daniel looked at their daughters, animated and alive, preparing to go support another family through the valley of shadows they knew so well. It's not just okay, he said. It's perfect. They left together, a family forged in crisis and strengthened by success, heading toward another impossible surgery that they would make possible. Behind them, the penthouse stood warm and waiting, a home built on second chances and synthetic grafts, mathematical genius and maternal determination, spilled wine and saved lives. The snow continued to fall over Manhattan, each flake unique and perfect in its imperfection, much like the hearts Daniel repaired. Not perfect, but perfectly functional, perfectly beautiful in their determination to beat against all odds. As their car moved through the white-shrouded streets toward the hospital, and another child who needed a miracle, Daniel thought about the strange path that had brought him here. A prestigious career destroyed by tragedy, 3 years of exile and survival, a chance encounter at a charity gala, and 2 brilliant girls who had taught him that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. The Yamamoto cross procedure would go into medical textbooks, would be taught in medical schools, would save thousands of children around the world. But for Daniel, it would always be personal. Grace's helical flow innovation, Lila's unwavering faith, Charlotte's fierce determination, and his own journey from broken to whole. The hospital lights appeared through the snow, beacon bright and welcoming. Somewhere inside, parents were waiting with the kind of desperate hope Daniel knew intimately. He would meet them, examine their child, and most likely perform another impossible surgery that the medical establishment would eventually accept as standard practice. But first, he would tell them a story about spilled wine and second chances, about mathematical genius in dying children and CEO mothers who refused to accept defeat. He would tell them that broken hearts, all kinds, could be rebuilt stronger. And then, with his family beside him and Sarah's memory blessing the work, he would pick up a scalpel and do what he was born to do, make the impossible possible, one heartbeat at a time. The newborn's parents were younger than Daniel had expected, barely out of college by the looks of them, holding each other in the family conference room with the shell-shocked expression he'd seen too many times. The father's name was James, the mother's Elena, and their daughter, barely 18 hours old, was named Hope. "We know it's late," Elena said, her voice raw from crying. "We know you must be exhausted, but when they told us about Hope's heart, the first thing the cardiologist said was that we should call you, that you're the only one who might—" She broke off, unable to finish. Daniel sat across from them, Charlotte beside him, while Grace and Lila waited in the hallway, their presence a living testament to what was possible. "Tell me about Hope," he said gently. "She was perfect," James said. 10 fingers, 10 toes, good weight. Then she turned blue during her first feeding. They did tests, and—" He gestured helplessly at the folder of medical records on the table. Daniel reviewed the echocardiogram results, his practiced eye taking in the familiar, devastating architecture of hypoplastic left heart syndrome. But there was something else, a small anomaly that others might have missed, a naturally occurring collateral vessel that shouldn't exist but did. "Charlotte, look at this," he said quietly, pointing to the unusual feature. She leaned in, her business acumen having evolved over the past weeks to include basic cardiac anatomy. "Is that good?" "It might be. It's creating a natural bypass that's buying us time. Most HLHS newborns need immediate intervention. Hope might have a few days, maybe a week." He looked at the parents. "This vessel is keeping her alive, but it won't last. We need to act soon, but we have a window to prepare properly." "You'll do the surgery?" Elena asked, hope and terror warring in her voice. "The Yamamoto cross procedure has never been attempted on a newborn," Daniel said carefully. "The graft would need to be miniaturized, the calculations adjusted for a heart the size of a walnut. It would be the most technically challenging version yet." "But possible," James pressed. Daniel thought of Grace's mathematics, of Lila's faith, of Charlotte's determination. With the right team and preparation, yes, possible. Charlotte was already on her phone, summoning the team. Within an hour, Karen Yamamoto was on a red-eye flight from Seattle. Tom Bradley was driving through the snow from Boston, and Angela Cruz was rebooking her flight back to Texas to stay another week. "We're becoming a trauma team," Karen said when Daniel called her. "But the best kind, the kind that saves lives everyone else has written off." While the team assembled, Daniel brought Grace and Lila to meet Hope. The NICU was dimmed for the night shift, machines beeping and humming their electronic lullabies. Hope lay in her isolette, impossibly small, her tiny chest working hard with each breath. "She's so little," Lila whispered. "You were smaller," Daniel reminded her. "Barely 5 pounds when you were born." "But my heart was whole then," Lila said. "It got sick later. She was born with hers broken." "Not broken," Grace corrected, her mathematical mind always seeking precision. "Incomplete. There's a difference. Broken things had function and lost it." Incomplete things are waiting for someone to finish what nature started. Through the isolette's plastic walls, Hope's eyes opened, that unfocused newborn gaze that seemed to see everything and nothing. Her tiny hand flexed, fingers spreading like a starfish. "Hi, Hope," Grace said softly. "Dr. Cross is going to complete your heart. And when you're older, Lila and I will teach you everything about being a heart warrior. It's actually pretty cool once you get past the scary parts." Elena and James watched from nearby, drawing strength from these two girls who radiated health despite their recent surgeries.